And Ameekyáaraam Sacred Lands Act, introduced by Representative Jared Huffman of California, and I will look forward to listening to the correct pronunciation of that. H.R. 6964 to authorize leases of up to 99 years for lands held in trust for the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation, introduced by Representative Marilyn Strickland of Washington. The discussion draft of the ANS to H.R. 7581, Yurok Lands Act of 2022, also introduced by Representative Jared Huffman of California. The H.R. 8115, Recreation and Public Purposes Tribal Parity Act, introduced by Representative Doug Lamalfa of California, and H.R. 8286 to take certain federal land and state of Washington into trust for the Lower Elwah Tribe and for other purposes, introduced by Representative Derek Kilmer of Washington. And so that we're not all on the West Coast, we have H.R. 8380, the Prairie Band Pottawatomi Nation Shibane Band Reservation Settlement Act of 2022, introduced by Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia of Illinois, and H.R. 8387, Parity for Tribal Law Enforcement Act, introduced by Representative Dan Newhouse of Washington. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member or their designees. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedule. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. Hearing no objection, so ordered. As described in the notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Members physically present should provide a hard copy for staff to distribute by email. Please note that members are responsible for their own microphones. As with our fully in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. I will begin by recognizing myself for my opening statement. And once again, I want to thank you. It's wonderful to look out at the hearing room and see all of the interest in the bills that we are hearing today. We have 7 bills on our document that are meant to uplift the economic development, recreational activities, public safety, and ultimately sovereignty of tribal nations. So we're going to go in numerical order. Our first bill is H.R. 6032, Katamin and Ameekyáaraam Sacred Lands Act, introduced by our fellow committee member, Representative Jared Huffman from California. The land in H.R. 6032 is traditionally known as Katamin and Ameekyáaraam. These lands are considered ceremonial areas and the sites of former villages. They are known to the Karuk Tribe as the center of the world. Although the tribe continues to use these lands for ceremonies and fish harvesting, access to these sacred sites is not always guaranteed. H.R. 6032 will resolve access issues for the tribe by placing 1,031 acres of land in the Siskiyou and Humboldt counties into trust. The second bill we will hear is H.R. 6964 to authorize leases of up to 99 years for lands held in trust for the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation. It was introduced by our colleague, Representative Marilyn Strickland from Washington. This bill will provide authority for the Chehalis Tribe to extend their lease agreements to pursue its planned economic development activities. This will enable the tribe to develop supply chain infrastructure, and we know how important that is. The third bill is H.R. 7581, Yurok Lands Act of 2022, also introduced by Representative Huffman. This bill supports the Yurok Tribe's natural resource-based economy by increasing the tribe's role in federal land management and improving its reservation infrastructure. For our hearing, we'll be discussing the discussion draft ANS, which removes Section 5, 7, 8, and 9 of the introduced legislation. Next up is H.R. 8115, the Recreation and Public Purposes Tribal Parity Act, introduced by our colleague, Representative Doug Lamalfa from California. This bill would amend the Recreation and Public Purposes Act to allow federally recognized tribes to participate in the Act's purchasing and leasing program to expand opportunities for land acquisition. It is an important effort to provide parity for tribes. Next, we have H.R. 8286 to take certain federal land in the state of Washington into trust for the Lower Elwah Klallam tribe, introduced by our colleague, Representative Derek Kilmer from Washington. This bill would restore lands to the tribe by placing them into trust. This will protect sacred and cultural lands, continue restoration efforts for the ecosystem, and uphold our trust and treaty obligations to the Lower Elwah Klallam tribe. The sixth bill is H.R. 8380, Prairie Band of Pottawatomi Nation Shibane Band Reservation Settlement Act of 2022, introduced by our colleague Representative Chuy Garcia from Illinois. H.R. 8380 will reaffirm the nation's ownership and jurisdiction over the 130 acres of land within the reservation that the nation has reacquired. It will extinguish the nation's title to the remainder of the original Shibaya Reservation and confirms ownership and title of the non-Indian individuals and governments occupying the land within this reservation, thereby clearing the title. Further, this bill will establish compensation for the wrongful taking of the 1,151 acres of land and allow the nation to utilize monies to reacquire an additional 1,151 acres of land on or near the reservation. This will not make them whole, but it will do the best that we can. Our last bill is H.R. 8387, the Parity for Tribal Law Enforcement Act, introduced by Representative Dan Newhouse of Washington. H.R. 8387 seeks to alleviate issues retaining and recruiting law enforcement. It would make tribal law enforcement officers acting under a 638 contract or a compact eligible for certain federal benefit programs such as for death, retirement, and pension. I look forward to hearing more on all the legislation before us. I will now recognize Ranking Member Obernolte for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I know we have a lengthy hearing today. I will keep my comments brief. We're hearing a number of really exciting bills that will make lives better for our tribes and the millions of Americans in Indian country. So I'm very happy to be part of the hearing today. I will do my best with the pronunciations. I'm surely not going to be as graceful as the chair in that respect. So our first bill, H.R. 6032, would place about 1,000 acres of culturally significant federal land in Siskiyou and Humboldt counties in my home state of California into trust for the Karuk Tribe. The second bill, H.R. 6964, would amend current law to authorize the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation to lease its trust land for a period of up to 99 years. Under the Long-Term Leasing Act, most tribes can only lease their lands in trust for a period of 50 years. However, it's important to note Congress has amended the Long-Term Leasing Act over 50 times to permit tribes greater leasing authority, and in this case, there are some pretty compelling arguments that a longer lease term is warranted. Third, the draft ANS to H.R. 7581 would place approximately 1,200 acres of U.S. Forest Service land in the Yurok Experimental Forest and Six Rivers National Forest into trust for the Yurok Tribe to be managed for conservation and research purposes. I understand that there was substantial opposition from other tribes to the original draft of the bill, and I'm very happy to learn that opposition has been removed in the ANS. I know I can probably speak for everyone on this dais how frustrating it is to us sometimes that the greatest opposition to bills intended to improve lives for people in Indian country comes from other tribes, and so I'm very happy that in this case compromise was reached. Fourth, H.R. 8115 would amend current law to add Indian tribes to the list of entities eligible to lease or purchase public lands from the Department of the Interior pursuant to the Recreation and Public Purposes Act. That would continue our policy of recognizing tribal sovereignty and self-determination by adding Indian tribes to the list of eligible entities to purchase or lease federal lands pursuant to the RNPP. So I'll be looking forward to hearing about that. Fifth bill, H.R. 8286, would place approximately 1,000 acres of NPS land into trust for the Lower Elwah Klallam tribe. That's a replacement for land lost after the tribe saw its land flooded due to the Elwah and Gilness dams on the Elwah River, so certainly seems like an equitable exchange there. Our sixth bill, H.R. 8380, would settle claims by the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation relating to the Shibane Band Reservation in northern Illinois and place 130 acres of land into restricted fee status for the tribe. Also, it authorizes $10 million for partial payment to settle this land claim. Now, this legislation, I'm looking forward to the testimony here. It's relatively uncommon to contemplate these kinds of claim settlements due to the finality of the Indian Claims Commission Act on Historic Land Claims prior to 1946. So it's going to be interesting to see how this works out. I'm a little cautious about this, but I'd like to hear from the tribe about that. I'd also like to hear about the arguments about these land claims so far from the tribal reservation. So we'll have that discussion when the bill is brought up. And lastly, H.R. 8387 would authorize tribal law enforcement officers acting under contracts or compacts to be considered federal enforcement officers in enforcing federal law, which I think is a concept that everyone on this panel supports. So I thank the witnesses for being here. Looking forward to the testimony. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Obernolte, for those comments. I will now ask unanimous consent that Representative Jared Huffman of California have permission to sit on the dais and participate in the hearing. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Now I would like to give the sponsoring members of Congress the opportunity to speak on behalf of their legislation. The chair will now recognize the gentleperson from Illinois, Mr. Garcia, for a statement on your legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the Ranking Member. For the past 200 years, the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation has been fighting for their land back after it was unlawfully taken. My colleagues, Representative Lauren Underwood and I, are seeking to correct that injustice with the introduction of H.R. 8083, the Prairie Band Potawatomi National Shibane Band Reservation Settlement Act, as a step forward in righting the wrongs committed against the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. This bill will seek to provide a remedy for the damages and lost rents to the Prairie Band associated with more than 170 years of being denied the use of lands by federal officials. We believe this legislation is more than reasonable, considering that the U.S. government stole their land and has been unwilling to compensate them for their loss or give them a new home for nearly 200 years. It would reaffirm the nation's ownership and jurisdiction over their land. This bill is an important first step toward restorative justice. It took us 173 years to get to this point, and frankly, Chairman, I'm disappointed in how long it has taken our government to fix this. Lastly, I look forward to working with Department of Interior and the Potawatomi Nation on the non-conforming amendments to switch from restricted fee status to a trust. I also look forward to working with the nation as they seek to attain a settlement for the damages assessed. The Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation is rooted in the community, and they deserve to finally have this issue resolved by Congress. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Representative Garcia. The chair now recognizes the gentleperson from Washington, Mr. Kilmer, for a statement on your legislation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Mr. Ranking Member and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill to take lands into trust and reservation status for the Lower Elwah Tribe. These lands are located along the Elwah River in the northwest corner of Washington State and have deep cultural, spiritual, and historical significance for the tribe and all S'Klallam peoples who have lived in the area since time immemorial. In the early 1900s, however, 2 dams were constructed on the river, having a significant negative impact on the local ecosystem. The dams, for example, did not include fish passages and, as a consequence, devastated the salmon and trout populations, which have significant cultural and economic meaning for the tribe. The dams also flooded a settlement site, seasonal camps, and sacred places, including land known as the Creation Site, the location the Creator bathed and blessed the Klallam people. Uncountable generations of Klallam people traveled to this location to purify themselves and receive spiritual guidance. In recognition of the impact on the ecosystem, Congress passed the Elwah River Ecosystem and Fisheries Restoration Act in 1992 and authorized the National Parks Service to acquire lands necessary to remove the 2 dams and restore the ecosystem. The law also directed the National Park Service to determine the suitability of DOI taking acquired lands outside the Olympic National Park into trust for the lower Elwah Clallam. As the dam removal process was completed in 2014, this bill completes the process envisioned in the Elwah Act by taking these culturally and spiritually significant lands into trust and reservation status for the benefit of the lower Elwah Clallam tribe. The tribe has also worked closely with the National Park Service on ecosystem restoration and will continue doing so. As the committee considers this legislation, I also want to acknowledge concerns raised by the Port Gamble and Jamestown Sklallam tribes, two sister tribes of the lower Elwah. These two tribes support the goals of the legislation, but want to ensure that the bill protects their rights under the Treaty of Point No Point to fish, hunt, and gather in these lands. I am fully committed to ensuring this bill protects Point No Point treaty rights of the Sklallam peoples, and I'm fully committed to working with the committee, Port Gamble, Jamestown, and Lower Elwah to make any needed changes to protect treaty rights. Both Port Gamble and Jamestown, as well as Lower Elwah, have shared proposed language, which I've shared with the committee staff. I urge the committee to give these changes all due consideration in the markup process. In closing, taking this land into trust and reservation status subject to Point No Point treaty rights will protect sacred and cultural lands, continue restoration of a unique, important ecosystem, and uphold the federal government's trust and treaty obligations to the lower Elwah Clallam tribe. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Kilmer, and thank you for your commitment to work on getting a bill ready for markup that meets all of those objectives. And it is interesting how today has been so dedicated in this committee to issues around protecting cultural ties to the land. The chair now recognizes the gentleperson from California, Mr. Huffman, for a statement on your legislation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Obernolte. Appreciate this hearing on two bills that are huge priorities for tribal communities in my district. I'll first turn my attention to the Katamin and Ameekyáaraam Sacred Lands Act. That's my best pronunciation, Madam Chair. A bill that will place lands in Humboldt and Siskiyou counties in Northern California into trust for the Karuk Tribe. We've introduced this bill for the first time this Congress, and notably Senator Padilla and Senator Feinstein have collaborated with us on the Senate side with a companion bill based on technical feedback that we've received from the administration and working with the Karuk Tribe to develop. And that bill had a successful hearing in the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs just a few weeks ago. Natural resource stewardship of land and wildlife, plants, water, these things are at the core of the Karuk people's culture and identity, but 95% of their Aboriginal territory is currently under federal management. This undermines the tribe's ability to exercise traditional practices that have been passed down since time immemorial. This bill seeks to return sacred ground, and I don't use that term lightly, very sacred ground to the Karuk tribe. It corrects a historic injustice. And I've had the immense privilege to visit Katamin and its surrounding areas. These places are not only majestic and beautiful, they're central to Karuk history, religion, culture, and identity. So placing them in trust is important. It ensures that the Karuk culture and way of life can endure for future generations. Chairman Atterbury is here, and he will be discussing this in further detail. But for the Karuk people, this land identified in this bill is at the center of the world, literally. The historical village and ceremonial site of Katamin is the location of the final series of the annual Pikiavish World Renewal Ceremonies. And Ameekyáaraam, just downriver from Katamin, is the site of the jump dance and the first salmon ceremony. Both of these are vital components of the World Renewal Ceremonies. This area is essential to intergenerational teaching and learning needed to ensure future generations of the Karuk people know and understand Karuk culture and customs. Currently, the tribe has a special use permit with the Forest Service that allows it access to the grounds for ceremony when things go well. This access is not guaranteed, and in some years the tribe is interrupted by public intrusions during private and sacred components of the World Renewal Ceremonies. Under this bill, only Forest Service lands are going to be transferred to the tribe, so there's no concern about private lands, allotments, or existing rights being excluded. I'll next turn my attention to the Yurok Lands Act. The revised Yurok Lands Act would expand the Yurok Reservation and support the tribe's resource-based culture and economy. The Yurok Tribe has relied on natural resources from the Klamath River to the Pacific Ocean since time immemorial. From salmon to redwood trees, these resources provide for subsistence and the cultural and economic livelihood of this tribal community. And this legislation transfers the Yurok experimental forest into trust for the tribe. This will support the tribe's ongoing work as a leader in forest management and conservation while ensuring continued use for existing Forest Service research. The legislation adjusts the Yurok Reservation boundary to include the experimental forest land, also tribally owned fee land and Forest Service land in another very sacred place, the Blue Creek watershed. It designates the Yurok Scenic Byway in the reservation, which will allow for infrastructure improvements and access to federal grants. And importantly, this legislation does not stop other tribes from cooperatively working with federal agencies or hinder participation in the NEPA process under existing authorities. We've been very careful to make sure of that. The legislation has been a long time coming. Been working on it for a couple of decades, predating even my time in the Congress, but the tribe first brought this to me in 2014, and I have worked with the Yurok as well as other surrounding tribes and stakeholders ever since. Following a hearing in this subcommittee in 2019 and some discussions that ensued, we made several changes that I think have been a real breakthrough. I appreciate Ranking Member Obernolte for recognizing that, and I'm so pleased to say that we've been able to remove the previous tribal opposition to this bill. We've really come a long way. So these positive discussions have happened with the Trinidad Rancheria and the Hoopa Valley Tribe and others. We've made meaningful, significant changes to address concerns, and I'm really pleased to be presenting this subcommittee with a bill that I think is ready to go and in really good shape. So, Madam Chair, the wonderful thing about both of these bills and the wide array of local support that we have is that they are involving really special sacred places, doing important things to improve the lives of tribal communities and, frankly, correcting historic injustices. Appreciate your leadership. I also want to thank the Karuk Tribe and the Yurok Tribe. Their leaders are here, and I look forward to hearing from them. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Huffman. The chair now recognizes the gentleperson from Washington, Ms. Strickland, for a statement on your legislation.
Thank you, Chair Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Obernolte, and members of the subcommittee for allowing me to speak in support of H.R. 6964 at today's hearing. I would be remiss if I did not mention late Representative Don Young of Alaska, a champion for Indigenous communities. I am thankful for his past leadership on this committee. My bill is simple. It will amend the Long-Term Leasing Act to give the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation leasing authority for up to 99 years. This will allow the tribe greater access to economic opportunity and strengthen their sovereignty. As a freshman in Congress, it is my honor to represent the Chehalis in Washington's 10th Congressional District and to work alongside their leadership. I am pleased this committee has invited Chairman Harry Pickernell to speak on H.R. 6964 as well. With a number of enterprises, the Chehalis are a strong community, but a 1955 law stands in the way of expanding economic development. The Long-Term Leasing Act of 1955 provides tribes with the authority to enter into lease agreement terms of up to 25 years with the potential renewal of an additional 25 years subject to the Interior Secretary's approval. Since this law's enactment, however, the act has been amended by Congress to give nearly 60 tribes expanded leasing authority. While no tribe should be impeded by these leasing restrictions, this expanded authority is both essential and timely for the Chehalis tribe. Chehalis has trust land off of Interstate 5 and Highway 12 that could be vital for our economy, including warehouse structures and other investments that will strengthen our supply chain. In the current financing environment, the tribe must provide leases of up to 99 years to potential investors for these large-scale and much-needed projects. And that's why I'm introducing H.R. 6964 and why the Chehalis need this expanded authority as soon as possible. I am proud to have partnered with Senator Cantwell, Representatives Derek Kilmer, and Herrera Butler on this measure. As of today, every single member of the Washington State Congressional Delegation is a co-sponsor of this bill, and it has support from the administration. During a legislative hearing in the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, Assistant Secretary of the Interior Brian Newland spoke in support of this language and of tribal equity for the Chehalis. And in a statement to the committee, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Garriott noted the department's support and the economic development opportunities that this bill will facilitate. This is a bipartisan issue. We all benefit with federal support across our branches of government, and it is something that we must get done. I thank the members of the subcommittee, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Strickland. The chair will now recognize the gentleperson from Washington, Mr. Newhouse, for a statement on your legislation.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Ranking Member Obernolte, as well as Chairwoman Ledger Fernandez, and members of the subcommittee as well, for allowing me to be here today to talk about what I think is very important legislation. Now, Central Washington is my home, but it is also home to many dedicated law enforcement officers who are well immersed and well respected within their communities. However, just like many other rural communities across the country, our officers are overworked and underpaid, partly due to the recent upticks in violent crime, gang activity, and certainly a surge of illegal drugs such as fentanyl. At the same time, Central Washington's Native communities are unfortunately the epicenter of some of our state's missing and murdered Indigenous women issues, the huge crisis in our country. Perhaps one of the greatest demonstrations of the close relationships between our tribal and non-tribal communities are our law enforcement partnerships. You know, crime knows no boundaries, and it's clear to me, as well as to my constituents, that our law enforcement community operates together to protect our interests and maintain public service for all of Central Washington. In meeting with the tribes and law enforcement officers that I represent, I've heard a resounding message. We need more resources, we need more help, and we need more qualified officers. To address these needs, I introduced the Parity for Tribal Law Enforcement Act. First, this bill makes tribal communities safer by reducing administrative barriers for tribal law enforcement officers to enforce federal law. Most tribal law enforcement officers are currently operating under self-determination contracts with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. These officers are currently required to meet training requirements, pass a background investigation, and possess nearly the same qualifications as a state or local law enforcement officer in order to enforce federal law. Currently, officers under these contracts have to enter special law enforcement commissions, or SLECs, in order to enforce federal law. Many tribes, including the Colville tribe in my district, already have SLECs in place and enforce federal law. These can be extra hurdles for tribes in Washington as well as across the country who are already strained in their budgets and lacking in qualified officers to fill spots. So this bill aims to eliminate these burdens by clarifying that tribal law enforcement officers have the same authority to enforce federal criminal laws as non-tribal federal officers, provided that they meet the same training, the same background, and other requirements. Second, the bill increases officer retention and recruitment efforts by providing tribal law enforcement agencies with the option to access federal pension and retirement benefits. You know, during my meetings with tribal partners, one of the most immediate challenges they face with law enforcement is losing their law enforcement officers to other law enforcement agencies. In fact, I heard from one county sheriff that actually told me he actively recruits tribal law enforcement because the quality of the tribal trained officers and the relationships that they have within their tribal communities. He's often successful in hiring these individuals because he can offer a more competitive package of benefits than the tribal officers can access otherwise. All the tribes that I've spoken to have told me that providing these benefits will help them attract and retain officers. While there are costs associated with providing these benefits to officers, based on the data available so far for our review, we have reason to believe that the cost will be very minimal. Regardless, the bill would significantly reduce the overall cost of recruiting new tribal law enforcement officers and increase public safety by keeping a higher number of good, qualified officers who have appropriate training on tribal lands. Many tribal law enforcement officers already enforce federal law as part of their regular duties. Providing federal benefits to these tribal officers is simply treating them fairly and in parity with their fellow officers with whom they work often on a daily basis. This bill benefits the entire law enforcement community and the safety of all of our communities, both tribal as well as non-tribal, by increasing literally the amount of ground law enforcement officers are able to cover, which is a significant challenge in rural areas of central Washington that I represent. And finally, enabling our tribal communities with the ability to better recruit and retain qualified law enforcement officers is a step in preventing and investigating devastating cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women. I'm proud that this bill has the support of several Washington state tribes, some of whom are here today to talk about how this important legislation would improve their public safety efforts. I believe it is long past time that we make these necessary changes and support each and every member of our law enforcement community. I look forward to working with tribal communities across the country to raise awareness of these issues and improve public safety. Thank you once again. I would urge the committee to pass this legislation as soon as possible. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Newhouse, for that work and summary on this important issue. Now I would like to transition to our first panel of witnesses for today. As we transition the witnesses, I'll go through the introductions. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. When you begin, the on-screen timer will begin counting down and will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I recommend that members and witnesses joining remotely lock the timer on the screen. When you go over the allotted time, I will tap my gavel and kindly ask you to please wrap up your statement. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I will allow the entire panel to testify. We begin the question portion of the hearing, which in this instance is 1. So I will now recognize Rizapangaria, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs in the Department of the Interior, for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair Leisure Fernandez, Ranking Member Obranolte, and members of the committee. Iuha chante washte nape choose apelo. I greet you with a good heart. My name is Wizipangalau Garriott, and I am a citizen of the Rosewood Sioux Tribe. I serve as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs at the U.S. Department of the Interior. Thank you for the opportunity to present the department's testimony regarding the bills before the committee today. The department has also submitted a statement for the record on H.R. 8115, the Recreation and Public Purposes Tribal Parity Act. H.R. 6964, a bill to authorize leases of up to 99 years for lands held in trust for the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Indian Reservation, would amend the Long-Term Leasing Act to allow the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Indian Reservation the flexibility to enter into leases for up to 99 years. The act authorizes Indian tribes to enter into surface leases with third parties with the approval of the approval of the Secretary of the Interior, but limits the term to 25 years with an option to renew for an additional 25 years. And an amendment is authorized, required to allow Indian tribes to lease their lands for a longer term. The department supports this bill, and it would facilitate economic development for the tribes. Switching to H.R. 6032, the discussion draft for H.R. 7581, Yurok Lands Act of 2022, and H.R. 8286, a bill to take certain federal lands in the state of Washington into trust for the Lower Elwah, Karuk Tribe, and for other purposes. Each of these bills, as amended, would transfer land from federal ownership to land held in trust for the tribes. Restoration of tribal homelands and agreements between federal agencies and tribes in the stewardship of public lands are priorities for the Biden administration and the department. The department supports the goals of these bills and would like to continue to work with the sponsors and the committee to ensure each bill achieves its goal. H.R. 8380, Prairie Band
Pottawatomi Nation Shibane Band Reservation Settlement Act of 2022 provides for the settlement of claims by the Prairie Band Pottawatomi related to the Shibane Indian Reservation. The bill affirms the tribe's ownership of 130 acres of the Shibane Reservation currently owned by the tribe in fee and mandates that the land be held in restricted fee. The bill requires the department to pay the tribe $10 million in partial settlement of the tribe's claims stemming from the United States illegal sale of the Shibane Reservation and directs the secretary to consult with the tribes to calculate the total damages due to the tribe and pay such damages under a final settlement agreement. The department generally supports resolving tribal land claims for the wrongful dispossession of their lands. The department has previously found the Prairie Band Pottawatomi Nation to be a successor in interest to the Shibane Band. But before proceeding with this legislation, we want to ensure that no other tribes may be a successor in interest. The department supports the goal of this legislation and welcomes the opportunity to work with the tribe, the sponsors, and the subcommittee to assist the tribe's claims and determine an appropriate settlement structure and terms. H.R. 8387, the Parity for Tribal Law Enforcement Act, provides that tribal law enforcement officers acting under a tribe's contract or compact under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act would have the authority to enforce federal law within the tribe's jurisdiction, provided they complete training and background requirements that are equivalent to employees of the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Justice Services. Importantly, the bill also provides that tribal law enforcement officers acting under a self-determination contract or compact shall be eligible for benefits applicable to federal law enforcement officers. The provision of federal benefits to tribal law enforcement will help immensely with tribes' ability to recruit and retain law enforcement officers and provide for the overall safety of their community. The department supports H.R. 8387 as a means to strengthen public safety and justice in Indian country. Chair and ranking member and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide the department's views on these important bills, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
I thank the first panel for their testimony, reminding the members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Garriott, I truly appreciate your testimony and your written testimony that notes Secretary Holland's and the department's priority to improve public safety in Indian country. The testimony earlier today from the author of the bill that the Law Enforcement Parity Act addresses the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis that we have seen. I have visited the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, which is located in New Mexico and in my expanded district, and I know and agree that these issues of they're highly trained when they're going through that federal law enforcement, but we need to make sure that we are able to retain them. I wanted to ask you to expand on the department's work in this area and how the Parity for Tribal Law Enforcement Act would support the efforts that you have ongoing. And I'll also want to ask you a couple of questions on the other bills, so just to give you a heads up on timing.
Yes. And thank you for the question. And training and improvement of our law enforcement officers is something that the department is continually committed to, and on a very personal note, builds on previous work that I had the opportunity to work on the last time I served in the administration. And one of the things I think is incredibly important about this bill is that it recognizes the incredible sacrifice that law enforcement officers place and put themselves and on a daily basis, and expanding benefits, federal employee benefits to them would aid greatly in tribes' ability to recruit and retain officers. We've seen this many times throughout Indian country. It's not an issue that's limited to just one state, but really all of Indian country. And on a very personal level, I've also seen the incredible commitment that law enforcement officers have made and the challenges that they face in dealing with multiple jurisdictions. and being able to not have to go through the SLEC process and to automatically, under certain provisions, be able to enforce federal law would be an incredible step forward.
Thank you. And providing the additional resources to our law enforcement officers, I think, is something that we can all agree on. I want to switch gears and note that just earlier today in this room, the other hearing room, I was at the National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands Subcommittee hearing where we heard from the Department of Interior and tribal leaders about the importance of protecting cultural resources on federal lands. And an important piece of that testimony was that when they were talking about tribes' ties to lands, waters, and the cultural resources located there, it's not just talking about a past, it's talking about a present, that there has been a continuous connection to the sacred nature of these areas. And so we need to remember that that connection has remained unbroken. Could you please expand on how the administration is working to support those and how you see the multiple bills that really we're hearing today that touch that? Do you think that this furthers that goal of maintaining those cultural ties to the sacred places?
Absolutely. The administration has been very committed to working with tribes to expand and build upon tribal stewardship of not only their lands, but federal properties as well. And utilizing indigenous knowledge and the experience that tribes have been utilizing since time immemorial for thousands of years is a net benefit not only for the tribes, but for everybody. And while there may be opportunities to, under various agreements, to provide access or to better steward lands, these bills, the ones that are the land bills that we're talking about today, allow and put the ownership into the tribe's hands. And
Thank you. And I wanted to make sure I just asked one quick question on H 8380, the Prairie Band Potawatomi Shibane Band Reservation Settlement Act. Right now, as written, it is reflecting placing land in restricted fee status. I know there's been conversation about amending that so it would mandate that the Secretary of Interior take the land into trust status. Would you support that? And
changing it from restricted fee to trust would not change our general support.
Thank you. I've used up an extra 24 seconds of my time. I apologize to the committee for that, and I shall yield to the ranking member, Obernolte.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Garriott, for your testimony. My first question pertains to the bills that you provided testimony on, H.R. 6032 and the discussion draft ANS to H.R. 7581. Those are bills that would place U.S. Forest Service land into trust for the benefits of the Yurok and Yurok tribes. Since we're taking land from the Forest Service and purporting to put it into trust, you've testified that the Biden administration is in support of this action. What are the thoughts of the U.S. Forest Service on this action?
As everyone knows, our testimony goes through a rigorous clearance process, and so overall the administration is supportive.
So you would say the Forest Service is supportive?
It is my understanding going through the clearance process, yes.
All right, thank you. And then talking about the bill that the chair was just referencing, H.R. 8380, probably one of the more complicated of the bills that we're considering today. There has been speculation about the purpose for which the tribe might use the lands that they acquire through this claims process. And just to be clear, my feeling is if they're entitled to the land, they should get the land regardless of what the use of the land would be for. But I just wanted to clear the air about the status of a couple of things. If the land was put into restricted free status, would it be eligible for the tribe to conduct gaming on that land?
Yes, under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, lands that would be acquired through a settlement claims process such as this would be eligible.
Okay, regardless of if it's in restricted fee status or if it's in trust?
If it's in restricted fee, yes.
Okay. And another part of the bill would authorize money to be paid to the tribe in settlement, partial settlement of the claim. If the tribe were to use that money to purchase land, would the land purchased meet the land claim exception under the Inland Gaming Regulatory Act?
That is my understanding, yes.
It would? All right. That concludes my questions. Thank you very much. I'll yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member. The chair will now recognize Representative Chuy Garcia from the state of Illinois.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Garriott, HR 8380 would recognize the land purchased by the tribe in restricted fee status. Would you support the amended language that would mandate that the Secretary of Interior take the land into trust status, and which is more common?
Amending the bill to change the requirements from restricted fee to fee would not change our general support for the goals of the legislation.
Okay. Yes, sir.
And with regard to your second question, I'd have to get back to you in terms of kind of acreage and what the specifics are in terms of what is more common.
Okay, thank you. I would await that. HR 8380 proposes a 9-year process to address the final compensation. Can you describe the process that you envision?
Well, I think that a lot of the details would, continue to have to be worked out between the department and the tribe. But as a general note, in terms of the process and the amount, we would have to undertake a study to do an assessment of what the value is and determine an appropriate kind of timeline and timeframe for that.
Okay. And then finally, the department determined 30 years ago that the Prairie Band was the sole successor in interest to the Shibane land. Are you aware of any other tribes that have recently come forward to claim Shibane's reservation other than the Prairie Band?
With regard to we're not aware of any recent tribes that have come forward, although we do understand that there may be 2 other tribes that would be successors in interest.
Okay. Does that mean that you affirm support of the department's opinion of 20 years ago?
With regard to that opinion, we have not had an opportunity to review it recently, and we would have to get back to you and the committee after consider to take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. That'd be much appreciated. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Garcia. Before we conclude with the witness panel, are there any members who have not had their 5 minutes and would seek recognition? Then I thank the witness for his valuable testimony and the members for the questions today. We will now move on to the next panel, our third panel of witnesses for today. Before introducing them, I will remind non-administration witnesses that they are encouraged to participate in the non-administration witnesses in the diversity survey created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Witnesses may refer to their hearing invitation materials for further information. Under our committee rules, the oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit longer statement for the record if you choose. When you begin, the on-screen timer will begin counting down. It will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I recommend that members and witnesses joining remotely lock the timer on their screen. When you go over the allotted timer, I'll kindly ask you to wrap up your statement. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise, I will allow the entire panel to testify before we begin the question portion of the hearing. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Wassel Atterbury, who is chairman of the Karuk Tribe. Chairman. For 5 minutes.
Yotua. Thank you. Ayuki, hello, Chair Ledger Fernandez and Ranking Member Obernolte. Yotua, thank you for inviting me here to testify on behalf of the Karuk Tribe. My name is Russell Buster Atterbury, and I'm the proud chairman of the Karuk Tribe. Before I get started with a prepared written statement, I would like to take this opportunity to speak from the heart a little bit. It is my honor to be here to testify for all the Karuk people, but most importantly, our Karuk elders who had fought so hard to keep our traditional tribal culture, our way of life, our religion alive in these sacred areas, and protecting and preserving these sacred areas for so many years through some very difficult times. With that being said, I would like to say the Karuk Tribe is extremely grateful to Congressman Huffman, Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez, Senator Padilla, Senator Feinstein, for their partnership in this endeavor to return these sacred lands to the Karuk people. And in the Karuk language, these places are known as Katamin, Ayuch, our center of the world, Ameekyáaraam, our place for the first salmon ceremony and world renewal ceremony, Ishkish, the Klamath River, Masufas, the Salmon River. Our traditional ancestor homeland encompasses a vast, remote territory of over 1 million acres in the mid-Klamath region of Northern California, near the Oregon border. The seizing of these lands by the United States was done without the free, prior, informed consent of the Karuk Tribe, nor did the establishment of the National Forest System specify its direct effects on our people. Our people have lived and conducted ceremonies in these sacred lands since time began, and the stewardship and management of these lands are vital to the preservation and continuation of Karuk culture, language, religion, and identity. Many aspects of our ceremonies require isolation from any kind of human interaction. In recent years, we've seen a dramatic increase in the disturbances from airplanes, helicopters, and recreational users. This legislation will provide our people protection from these types of negative and disrespectful occurrences. The tribe's historic and present-day government-to-government relations with the United States is due in large part to ceremonial leaders and their families conducting ceremonies and rites on these lands. These areas are integral to understanding Karuk creation stories as well as perpetuation of Karuk customs, language, and culture. This legislation will also provide the Karuk Tribe what other Americans have long had right to do, which is freely exercise their religion on land that is sacred to us, without the fear of outside disturbances, interference, and interruptions. Our Karuk legislative team has conducted an exhaustive outreach to educate stakeholders, our tribal neighbors, local and state governments, the administration and Congress about this legislation and why it is so desperately needed. We have also facilitated productive internal discussions with Karuk ceremonial families and community members to ensure we have their support and advocacy through this process of returning the center of the world to our people. To date, we have received no opposition to the Katamin and Ameekyáaraam Sacred Lands Act. We look forward to working with Congress and administration to have this bill enacted as quickly as possible to return these sacred lands to their original stewards, Yotua. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I'll just let people know that we have been called to votes. We have some time that we may continue, and I'd like to, and the ranking member has agreed that we will continue the hearing so that we can move through the panel. But then we will have to, at some point, call a recess so we can go vote. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Harry Pickenell Sr., who is the chairman of the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Fernandez, Ranking Member Albernolte, and members of the committee. My name is Harry Pickenell, Chairman of the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation. I am pleased to testify today in support of H.R. 6964. This bill would amend the Long-Term Leasing Act to add the Chehalis Tribe to the list of 59 other Indian tribes that are able to enter into leases with third parties with terms of up to 99 years. I would like to thank the committee for having this bill on the agenda today. I would also like to thank Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland for introducing the bill, along with 7 other members of the Washington State delegation to have co-sponsored this bill. Southwest Washington State has long been an economically depressed area, lacking in businesses and jobs for tribal members and non-tribal alike. The Chehalis tribe is always looking for ways to diversify its economic base, to continue to support its education, health, housing, safety, and other programs for our members. For example, in 2020, the Chehalis tribe opened Talking Cedar, a destination restaurant and brewery, the first ever legal distillery built in Indian country. This committee assisted in making the Talking Cedar project a reality when in 2018, Congress had repealed the 1834 law that prohibited constructing distilleries in Indian country. The repeal of that 19th century law allowed the Chehalis tribe to begin construction on the distillery, which was completed in 2020. Talking Cedar has been a tremendous success and is the largest craft distillery west of the Mississippi. Today, we ask the committee to again assist the Chehalis tribe in its efforts to diversify its economy. The Long-Term Leasing Act limits the terms of surface leases of tribal trust land to an initial 25-year term with a 25-year extension for a total of 50 years. Since 1955, Congress has amended the law and authorized the Secretary to approve leases of up to 99 years for 59 Indian tribes. This bill would simply add the Chehalis tribe to that list and authorize the tribe to execute leases with terms of up to 99 years. The Chehalis tribe is currently making improvements to 2 parcels of tribal trust land that are located on major transportation routes on Interstate 5 and State Highway 12. Both parcels have adjacent access to a railroad and would be very suitable for warehouse operations. The tribe has received proposals for developing multiple warehouse facilities on these parcels to serve supply chain needs between the cities of Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, and Portland. All these proposals, however, would require the tribe to be able to execute leases of up to 99 years. The financing and economic landscape today makes working within the existing 50-year term no longer viable for larger scale construction projects. Adding the Chehalis tribe's name to the list of tribes in the Long-Term Leasing Act with 99-year lease authority would address the tribe's immediate need to secure these leases and make these projects a reality. The Chehalis tribe would also like to express its support for another bill on the agenda today, the Parity for Tribal Law Enforcement Act. Another of the Chehalis tribe's representatives, Congressman Derek Kilmer, introduced this bill with Congressman Dan Newhouse. We have explored establishing a pension program for our tribal officers, but quickly determined that it would be cost prohibitive for the tribe to undertake alone. The Chehalis tribe is fortunate to be able to pay our law enforcement officers competitive salaries. We are not, however, able to compete with the pension and retirement benefits that state and local officers receive, thus losing officers to those jurisdictions as a result. For these reasons, we strongly support H.R. 8387. I thank the committee for allowing me to provide this testimony and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Joe James, Chairman of the Yurok Tribe.
Good afternoon, Chairman Fernandez, Ranking Member Albernolte, and members of the subcommittee. It is an honor to be here today to testify in support of the Yurok Lands Act. My name is Joe James. I'm the chairman of the Yurok Tribe. The Yurok Tribe has been working on this bill for over 20 years to protect our tribal members, preserve our cultural and natural resources, address historical wrongs, and fulfill the intent of the Yurok Settlement Act of 1988. Before I move on, I want to thank our current tribal council. I want to thank our Yurok tribal council in the past, and also a council that's no longer here. We have worked hard, many hours of tribal leadership since the beginning of this bill. So I want to recognize them and thank them for their leadership. This bill reflects years of meeting with Representative Huffman, nation-to-nation meetings with local tribes, and consultation with local governments, environmentalist organizations, and businesses. This extensive engagement has led to many refinements and compromise to the Yurok Lands Act. Over many years of hard work, the tribe crafted the Yurok Lands Act to promote sustainable economic development on Yurok lands, protect its cultural traditions, and preserve the Yurok way of life. The Yurok Land Act advances these goals by adding land and resources to tribal ownership and use. The tribe has carefully tailored the Yurok Land Act to achieve its goals and satisfy any applicable federal law and regulations. It has also made numerous changes to the Yurok Lands Act to address the concerns of local stakeholders. For example, after a legislative hearing in September 2019 from a previous version of this bill, the tribe removed 4 sections from the Yurok Lands Act of 2019 to address the concerns of local tribes. The Yurok Lands Act remaining sections simply expand the Yurok Reservation boundary to include lands the tribe recently purchased and transfers into trust land adjacent to the reservation. I will briefly discuss the 3 major components of this bill. First, the Yurok Land Act authorized 1,220 acres of the Yurok experimental forest to be transferred into trust for the tribe. Currently, this old-growth forest is under the management of the U.S. Forest Service Research Branch. Upon transfer, the tribe will be responsible for providing basic forest management necessary to improve the health of the forest, including fire prevention mitigation and maintenance of roads. The tribe owns an adjacent parcel of 20 acres of land. This partially consists of old-growth forest and includes an area cleared to build tribal offices for our forestry and environmental departments. The tribe wants to manage the 1,209 acres of the Yurok experimental forest and adjacent parcel as one forest to improve conservation of this important old-growth redwood forest by using traditional and modern forest management conservation practices. The Yurok Land Act prohibits any gaming or logging on the old-growth forest and requires the tribe to allow the U.S. Forest Service to continue its research in the forest in perpetuity. Second, the Yurok Lands Act extends the eastern boundary of the Yurok Reservation, include the important Blue Creek watershed and 60,000 acres that the tribe purchased over the past 13 years to reclaim its Aboriginal territory. The Blue Creek watershed is a natural cold refuge for salmon migrating upstream on the Klamath main stem. Its restoration and preservation is necessary to restore Klamath salmon runs. These salmon runs are less than 5% of the historical numbers, and the United States has declared a tribal fisheries disaster for the Yurok fisheries for the last 6 years. Currently, the tribe manages the watershed as a salmon sanctuary according to a management plan to enhance the benefits of salmon and only allows land use that improves salmon habitat. But more is needed to improve the runs. The Yurok Land would confirm these protections and ensure they continue in perpetuity. In addition, Blue Creek is a sacred site known as the Yurok People's Stairway to Heaven. It is a path for the high country of the tribe's sacred lands in which our ancestors, our ancient spirits live. Blue Creek is also a site where we collect our traditional plants we use for healing. Finally, the Yurok Lands Act designates Bald Hills Road from its junction from US 101 to its end on the Klamath River as a Yurok Scenic Byways. We want to thank the subcommittee for hearing on the Yurok Lands Bill. We're extremely grateful for Representative Congressman Huffman's commitment to addressing our issues through this bill while being respectful of and balancing other tribal and local interests. Congressman Huffman and his staff have held countless meetings with us, other tribes, and local entities to thoroughly vet this bill. All the compromises in this bill reflect these efforts. This bill has won wide support. We will continue to work on the passage of this bill because the future of the Yurok people depends on it. We will also continue to support land restoration for all tribes, and we believe that tribes should support each other's land restoration efforts. We look forward to working with you and your staff to make sure this bill supports our efforts to protect the Yurok people. Walk loud. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman James. The chair will now recognize the Honorable Frances Charles, who is the chairwoman of the Lower Elwah Tlallam Tribe.
Chairwoman Fernandez, acting ranking member Urban Nolte, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee for Indigenous People of the United States. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on H.R. 8286 to transfer certain federal lands on the Elwah River to the Elwah Clallam Tribe and Trust on the reservation status. I also want to thank Representative Kilmer for introducing this bill and Representative Cole for co-sponsoring. And we appreciate the work of our partner at the National Park Service in contributing to the development of this bill. My name is Frances Charles. I am the tribal chairwoman for the Elwah Clallam Tribe and a tribal council member. I've been on tribal council since 1993 as a chairwoman for the past 20 years. I thank my ancestors, our veterans, and all of the other previous and prior council members. That's the reason why I'm here today. Our reservation is located on the Elwah River where it flows into the Strait of Juan de Fuca on the Olympic Peninsula. I flew 3,000 miles to be here today for one reason, to spend 5 minutes with you in person telling you how important this bill is to our tribe and how long we had waited and how hard we had worked for it. The Elwah River is our lifeblood, and our Elwah people have lived there for thousands of years in balance with the abundant salmon runs, which also provides food and ceremony as our elders had witnessed in their lives. In 1913, the Elwood Dam was built just a few miles upstream from our homes. No one told us and no one asked. The dam blocked 95% of the river, and almost overnight the salmon runs were destroyed, reduced to a small fractions that what it used to have been. Since then, we have been working to get the dams removed. For many years, no one gave us a chance, but it finally happened. The 1992 Elwah River Act passed by Congress set into motion the process that led to dams removal, which finally happened to start in 2011. The last dams were removed in 2014. Seeing and witnessing with my own eyes, our ancestors appeared from above. The joy and the tears from our elders present, that there are no words that could describe our emotions of joy of the day of the celebrations. We are very grateful for all the partnerships we have developed that led to the 1992 Act and the actual removal of the dams, but we still have much work to be done to fully restore the fish runs throughout all of the habitat that now is accessible. We have submitted detailed written testimony explaining the history leading up to the dam removal and our tribal leading roles in every aspect of the process, but I want to focus on the land transfer in this bill. The foundation of the current bill was established in 1992 Elwah Act, specifically naming our tribe as the eligible recipient of the former Aldwell Reservoir lands. None of the other entities named in the 92 Act with the land, National Park Service, Wildlife Refuge, or the state, only the Lower Elwah. The largest piece of the land to be transferred by the bill was the old Aldwell Reservoir site at a little over 1,000 acres in our backyard. These lands are outside the boundary of the national park, a short distance from our reservation. The National Park Service does not want to hold them now that the dam removal has been accomplished. This area of great cultural significance to the Lower Elwah tribe and including our creation site and has submerged for over 100 years. It is difficult to explain just how important it is to have this restored to us. Since the dam removal, our tribe has led the effort to revegetate the site with natural shrubs, trees, and remove invasive plants, and also improve the fish habitat by constructing carefully placed engineered log jams in the river. The bill also transferred some small parcels that touched upon the reservation boundaries. These parcels are needed for the water line that delivers the river water into our reservation hatchery. We need to move this bill along and get it passed into Congress. Elwah has waited for this for years. The Aldwell land included our sacred ancestral grounds, creation sites, and we have been the whole sole lead in tribe that has worked so many years and have put all of the resources, knowledge into the dam removal. We ask for legislation and the support, and we have for the disclaimer language that ensures all of our treaty rights are protected, and we will work with our sister tribes as part of the river restoration efforts to see the tribal hunting and fishing practices. We thank Representative Kummer, this committee, and the Park Service for bringing this last piece of the dam removal project closer. And thank you for your time, and I am available for any questions.
Thank you so very much, Chairwoman, and for reminding us of the efforts that each of our witnesses goes through to bring their testimony on the voices of the elders, the council member, and their members. The chair will now recognize the Honorable Joseph Rupnick, who is the chairman of the Prairie Band of Potawatomi Nation.
Mano Gizna Kwa. Good afternoon, Chairperson Leger Fernandez, Ranking Member Obernolte, and members of the subcommittee. I am Joseph Rupnick. I'm the chairman for Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. I'm a survivor of the federal Indian boarding school system, and I served this country as a U.S. Army Cavalry Scout. My nation and I are descendants of the Potawatomi people that initially inhabited the Great Lakes area of what is now northern Illinois, northern Indiana, and southern Wisconsin. Today, most of our 4,500 citizens reside on or near our reservation in Kansas. We're in Kansas because the Prairie Band Pottawatomi people were removed from our homeland through the government's Indian removal policy of 1830. Through a series of treaties with the federal government, ending with the Treaty of Chicago in 1833. Our ancestors relinquished ownership of 5 million acres of land in northern Illinois. As part of that removal treaty, the U.S. Senate carved out and saved 1,280 acres of land located in rural DeKalb County, Illinois, about an hour west of Chicago. That land was owned by Potawatomi Chief Shibane and reserved for him and his descendants. I am one of them, and he was my great-grandfather, fourth removed. Although the 1833 treaty expressly preserved Shibane's 1,280 acres of land, the U.S. government illegally sold that land in 1849 in violation of federal law, while Chief Shibane was traveling to visit his family in Kansas. Since that time, we have diligently sought to restore our ownership and sovereignty over the reservation. 30 years ago, my mother, Mamie Rupnicki, intensified our efforts when she was our chairperson, which led us to buy back about 10% of the reservation from the prior non-Indian occupants. 20 years ago, the U.S. Department of Interior twice reviewed the history of the reservation and concluded the reservation still existed, and it also concluded that the Prairie Band was the only tribe that is successor in interest to Chief Shibane. And it recommended that Congress act to resolve and settle our outstanding claim to the land. The existence of the reservation was affirmed by the recent U.S. Supreme Court case, McGirt versus Oklahoma, which held that Indian reservation boundaries remain intact unless Congress expressly acts to disestablish them. Despite our efforts, 90% of the Shibane Reservation today is still occupied by non-Indian governments and non-Indian homeowners. Their deeds include language that subjects their titles to, and I quote, all rights, claims, or title to the descendants of the Potawatomi Indian chieftain named Shibane and his band, unquote. In July, H.R. 8380 was filed with bipartisan support to settle all outstanding issues associated with the illegal taking of Shibane's reservation by the federal government. We need this legislation to confirm our sovereignty and jurisdiction over the land that we own, to provide settlement to the economic damages that has accrued since 1849, and to clear the title of the local citizens and local governments. Although we would like to keep the entire reservation, our goal is to resolve all outstanding issues without resorting to decisive, costly, and protracted litigation with the residents and state and local governments. Our approach to redrawing the reservation boundary lines and allowing us to acquire new lands near the reservation is a win-win solution for everyone involved. Like Shibane before us, we have built very positive relationships with the local community over the years, and we want to preserve those relationships. We have spent nearly $10 million buying back our own land, and our economic damages for the lost use of land since 1849 have been calculated at $99.1 million. We seek a fair settlement payment to offset our losses, purchase additional replacement lands up to 1,280 acres, and remedy this historic injustice. We support an amendment to H.R. 8380 that allows this payment to be made upon enactment rather than a 9-year process set forth in the bill as introduced. We also support language that directs our land be taken into trust by the Interior Department rather than recognized as restricted fee. Thank you again for the opportunity to present this testimony, and I'm glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chairman, for your testimony. The chair will now recognize the Honorable Elaine Hart as Chairman of the Susanville Indian Rancheria.
Chairwoman Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Obernolte, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on H.R. 8115, which would include tribal governments as eligible entities under the Recreation and Public Purpose Act. First, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to our Congressman, Doug LaMalfa, for introducing this bill, and to our Senator, Alex Padilla, for introducing the companion bill in the Senate. This simple bipartisan fix will help create parity between tribal nations and other governmental entities for the purposes of the act so that tribal governments can participate in the program in the same way that states, localities, and nonprofit organizations can. The Recreation and Public Purpose Act, also called the RMPP, authorizes the Secretary of the Interior to sell or lease public lands for recreational and/or public purposes to state and local governments and to qualifying nonprofits. For almost 70 years, this law has allowed these entities to buy and lease public lands to be used for public purposes, often at a large discount. For example, under this law, land may be permanently conveyed to state and local governments at no cost when the land is used for recreational or historical monument purposes. For other uses serving the general public and where state and local government will control and use the land for governmental purposes such as parks, social services, and administrative service building. These entities may lease or purchase land at nominal rates. Currently, tribes are mistakenly left out of this law, so tribes not able to acquire land from the Department of the Interior through this process to provide for these socially beneficial, recreational, or public uses. This can also mean that a tribe that is best suited to protect and or interpret sensitive cultural and historical sites that are within the tribe's ancestral homelands has no role in the disposition of such lands if they come up for transfer. It is time to correct this oversight. The omission of Indian tribes from the list of qualifying applicants under the RMPP has no clear policy rationale and appears to be an oversight, but one with unintended negative consequences. Since the RMPP's passage in 1926 and the subsequent revision in 1954, Congress has continually acknowledged and strengthened tribal sovereignty and self-determination. Under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, Congress gave Indian tribes the right to acquire excess and surplus property of federal agencies. Just as Indian tribes are able to assume responsibility for federal programs and excess and surplus property under ISDAA, the tribes should be afforded the same opportunities as state and local governments to buy and lease public lands for the public and recreational purposes. The Bureau of Land Management and the DOI has identified a list of lands across 18 states that are potentially available for disposal under the RMPP. RMPP grantees hold the land in fee status. However, the RMPP imposes two key restrictions on grantees' use of the land. First, title of the land cannot be transferred except to another eligible entity and with the Secretary's approval. Second, entities cannot change the use of the land beyond the original recreation and or public purpose without Secretary's consent. The Susanville Indian Rancheria, this legislative fix would allow DOI to transfer to the tribe a parcel of property that Chico State Enterprises currently has in its possession. The tribe has deep cultural, historical, and geographic connection to this land, and in accordance with this program, we are planning to use this site for cultural and recreational purposes only. The local community was given the opportunity to purchase this land, but only the Susanville Indian Rancheria was interested. Yet we cannot assume responsibility for the property because tribes are not included among eligible entities when the original statute was enacted. DOI has provided input in crafting this legislation and is non-controversial and bipartisan. This legislation is also supported by National Congress of American Indians and the Northern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. Again, thank you for holding this meeting today and for your support of HR 8115. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, very much for your testimony. And finally, the chair would now like to recognize the Honorable Jared Michael Erickson, who is chairman of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. Chairman, can you get on camera? We need to be able to see, have a visual as well as an audio of your testimony. We will try to have the technical issues fixed, and we will take the resource so that we can go and vote. I want to thank the ranking member for being willing to walk really fast with me so we can make the vote. I did want to try to get through all of the testimonies today. And I truly, thank you for your patience. I know you have come a long distance to bring the stories and the reasons why these different pieces of legislation are so important. We will reconvene as soon as the last votes are over. We will walk back over. I wish I could tell you exactly how long that is, but we don't. It won't be more earlier. It's at least, what do you think? About, yeah, somewhere around under an hour, maybe 40 minutes, 45, something like that. So thank you very much. And with that, we are now in recess. Thank you.
Back on camera. Thank you. Chairman Erickson, can we have you on camera, please?
Resume the hearing. I want to, first of all, thank everybody for their patience. The votes went longer than we had anticipated. There was additional business. As I was speaking with our witnesses, one mentioned that they have waited for hundreds of years for us to right some of these injustices. And while that may be the case, I still am very grateful for the patience that you all have shown today. The chair will now recognize the Honorable Jared Michael Erickson, who is the chairman of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. Welcome, Chairman. The floor is yours.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. All right, good afternoon, Chairwoman Fernandez, Ranking Member Obernolte, and members of the committee. My name is Jared Michael Erickson. I'm the chairman of the Colville Business Council, which is the governing body of the Colville Tribes. I want to thank you for inviting me to testify in HR 8387, the Parity for Tribal Law Enforcement Act. First, I'd like to thank Congressman Newhouse for introducing this bill and for participating in today's hearing. Half the Culver Reservation is within Congressman Newhouse's district, and we appreciate his interest in tribal law enforcement and the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Culver Tribe strongly supports H.R. 8387 and urges the committee to approve it quickly. As I mentioned in my written statement, on any given shift, the Colville Police Department has an average of only 3 officers on duty to patrol the entire 2,275 square miles of the Colville Reservation. This means that an officer's backup is at least 30 minutes away by car at any given time, though usually longer. We currently have 9 tribal officer vacancies out of our 30 police officer department, which means we are operating at 2/3 capacity. This high vacancy rate is mostly due to our challenges recruiting and retaining police officers and the inability of the Colville tribes or other similarly situated Indian tribes, to provide benefits that are competitive with those offered by the state and local police departments. Because of this, we have an ongoing pattern of recruiting and training officers only to see them leave for jobs with neighboring towns and municipalities that offer more attractive benefits. This is a similar story throughout all of Indian country. Colville PD officers not only enforce tribal laws and state laws through cross-deputization agreements, they also enforce federal laws. Our officers possess special law enforcement commissions, or SLECs. SLECs are agreements with the BIA that authorize the tribal officers to enforce violations of federal laws. Neither Colville PD officers nor any other tribal law enforcement officers that possess SLECs receive any additional compensation from the BIA for undertaking those duties. Our tribal PD assumes these federal duties out of necessity because most major crimes like rape and murder in Indian country are federal offenses. We need to have officers that can put forward the best case for federal prosecution. We currently have to rely exclusively on the FBI for carrying the cases forward to the U.S. Attorney. So we really have no choice but to enforce federal laws ourselves to protect our citizens and our community. H.R. 8387 would allow tribal law enforcement officers to be considered federal enforcement officers for purposes of certain federal laws, including for federal pension and retirement benefits. For Colville tribes, allowing our tribal law enforcement officers to begin accruing pension and retirement benefits would have immediate benefits. It would provide a more attractive benefit package to would-be officers and would help us keep officers that Colville Tribe PD trains from leaving for other jurisdictions. It would also open the door for tribes to attract law enforcement officers that may be employed by the federal government but may wish to work for an Indian tribe without losing their benefits. It would also make working for Indian tribes an option for those federal law enforcement officers that have reached the federal mandatory retirement age of 57 but desire to continue working as a law enforcement officer for a few more years. As I mentioned, the Colville PD and many other tribal law enforcement agencies already perform the duties of federal law enforcement officers. Making this change would put tribal officers in parity with their federal officer counterparts and recognize the heightened responsibility our officers undertake. In conclusion, the Colville Tribe strongly supports the Parity for Tribal Law Enforcement Act and hopes this committee moves it quickly. I would be happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Linda, thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We will now move to member questions. And I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. And we have so much work that we've done today, I'm having to scroll through. So, as I said earlier, I am quite grateful to each of you who have testified today for not only coming and providing your testimony, but for reminding us that you are bringing to the subcommittee and to Congress not just the words that you have submitted in your written testimony or spoken today, but really the wishes and intent of your elders, your people, and sometimes the salmon that you are trying to work to protect and save, the cultural sites that you should be able to protect and should not be, they're not tourist sites, they are important and revered and should be protected by those who know how to hold them sacred. And so I want to thank every one of you for sharing that with us. You know, we've heard so resoundingly clear the connection that you have to these places that when we're talking about certain land into trust or even law enforcement, right? The Law Enforcement Parity Act is about preserving the safety of the people that you represent and have come here to discuss. So, respect and reciprocity in caring for the land and caring for the people you represent is really came out clearly today in this testimony. So Chairman Pickernell, first I want to recognize the importance of your tribe of being able to enter into the longer-term leases for generating economic activity. I did a lot of financing before I got to Congress, and so understand that so well. I also appreciated the manner in which you talked about the importance of having 99-year leases without having to come back to Congress so that we're not just getting, okay, let's add somebody else to that lease. But could you please share with us what not having that congressional authority immediately, what impact has that had on your ability to pursue some of your economic development efforts?
It's a struggle we have because while the 50-year leases have worked in the past, I think the lenders are getting to the point where they're looking at 80, 90, 99-year leases to get that sense of security on their loans and their investment into the tribes. So this just strengthens that commitment from the tribe to those lenders.
Well, thank you so very much. Chairwoman Charles, you described, I think, real eloquently the fact that this is the last step, am I correct, and what you need in terms of the dam removal to get to where you need to do. So what would, when you think about this last step, it doesn't work without this last step. Is that correct? Tell us what it means to actually finally accomplish what you began many years ago.
As I stated in my testimony a little bit earlier as well, I mean, there's really no words that could describe the journey that we have taken on this. It's what I always say is it's something that I inherited from my ancestors as well as from the previous council members. But in the last step itself with the land acquisition, it tells the tale. It's in between our sacred lands. We have a lot of stories that our elders had talked about that is no longer a myth, it's the reality of it. Having the stories that have been brought forth, not only to me, but to our future generations and in regards to where do we go from here? It's something that we have lived and we have breathed every day of our lives to have this take place for us, to finish with the land acquisition itself. It's something that we've been waiting for generations, for years.
Well, thank you so very much for traveling these distances, for waiting, and for pushing to finalize what you've been working on. Chairman James, would you share a little bit, and we're almost out of time, sort of the intent of the changes that you made to the legislation and where you believe we are at in terms of coming to agreement on it?
Yeah, I'll try to be real quick. The changes that we made is we removed our governing documents. That includes our ancestral territory outside of our reservation boundary. So after further discussion, we removed that out of there. We also removed a co-management language out of there too. And again, the intent was for Yurok, but after discussions, we removed those out. And all we're doing now is revise, extending our reservation boundary on the east side of our reservation with the land that we own already and manage and partner with the Forest Service. And we're also including a little over 1,200 acres, the experimental forest that's within the Forest Service's hands. And again, we have our Forest Service building, environmental department building there. We manage it and operate it already. And with the byways, which is a road that connects our upper and lower part of the reservation that's owned by Humboldt County, who we work and partner with, go after grants for it, and contribute millions of dollars there, working with our partners there. But yeah.
Thank you very much. And I did want to also, with regards to, I want to really thank Chairman Wupnick as well as Chairman Atterbury for the manner in which you have expressed the ability and the willingness to look at alternatives as we've worked through this legislation to what would work best in terms of getting us to a place where you come to a settlement, getting us to a place that feels more familiar and comfortable with the agencies. And so thank you very much for bringing that to your attention. And although we did require that you wait longer, I've gone over my time, and I will now yield to our ranking member for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us through this recess. It is, believe me, just as frustrating for us as it is for you when this happens. Sometimes life in Congress is crazy, and this is one of those days when we feel like half our brain is in 10 different places. So thank you very much for bearing with us, because the testimony that you have and the fact that you're willing to be here testifying on behalf of your tribes is incredibly important, not just to us, but obviously to the people that you represent. Chairman Rupnick, I wanted to ask a little bit more about the economic damages that the tribe has incurred as a result of the taking of these lands, because I know that's an important part of the bill. And you'd mentioned that, I know the bill has just a benchmark figure of $10 million in it. You'd mentioned that you've done an economic analysis that puts the damage at over $99 million. Can you talk about that damage and the way it was calculated?
We hired a global firm. It was Compass Lexicon that actually done the economic analysis on that. And they looked at the loss of use of land from 1849 up until the present day, or actually 2 years ago, when that study was complete. We looked at, what was available to us throughout that whole time, what should have been given to us based on the use of that land and being denied the use of that land.
Well, hopefully we can right some of those historical wrongs.
That's what we're hoping for too.
I think everyone is unified in the desire to do that. Chairman Erickson, if you're still on remotely, I have a question for you about HR 8387. I think it's a really great bill. One of the things that I think that many members of the subcommittee want to talk about is the potential costs on extending those federal employment benefits to tribal officers. Have you done an analysis on what the fiscal impacts of that bill might be?
Yeah. Do you hear me again? I want to make sure. Okay. Yeah, we've done some initial analysis. There was initially it was the defund the police movement that, that prompted some Washington State legislature a couple years ago. Some of that helped curtail a lot of enforcement activities that it also limited our enforcement authority. That also resulted in a lot of confusion. I think it also negatively impacted the public views of law enforcement in general. To your question, the Washington State Association of Sheriff and Police Chiefs has released a report last year that found that Washington State has the fewest number of law enforcement officers per capita of any state in the country, with only 1.38 per 100,000 residents. Some of the initial analysis we got that there wouldn't be significant impacts to this because of the number of tribal police officers. I'm not sure if I can add any more. We've done some additional data, but based on what we've read so far, we're cautiously optimistic of the bill not have significant impact on the direct spending.
Sure. And what about the total federal government cost? Has anyone done an analysis of that?
We also looked at the Congressional Budget Office, and they now analyze similar bills. I can't answer completely on that to have a good answer, but I don't think there'd be very minimal impacts, I believe.
Great. And one last question for you, sir. Can you talk a little bit more about the recruitment challenges that you face in recruiting officers to do this job? Because I know your written testimony had some what I found really compelling elements to it.
Yeah, so we have a lot of the issues that I have is, something that's been talked about is a lot of our, just talking with our public safety director earlier, who oversees our police department, over the chief of police, mentioned some issues with local counties, knowing that they can actually, that we train great officers, and then they end up, knowing that they offer better benefits, they can actually just steal those individuals. And then also within our police department, we have a lot of issues with recruitment. Like I said, we have 9 vacancies, I believe, right now. 6, sorry, I should read something. But one thing I also want to talk about is the issue we have with just the amount of area our officers have to cover. So I talk about long drive times, responding to domestic violence calls, disturbance, violent offenses, that the backup time our officers have to, and the lack of backup for some is, I think, a deterrent as well. So some are talking to our public safety director, and she mentioned that for 12-hour shifts, some of our officers get close to 1,000 miles in on one shift, but at the gas up about 4 times during that shift. So just the area they have to cover, the benefits offered by their local municipalities, make it deterrent, not deterrent, but it's looked at to better benefits at their agencies to work at. So it's hard to retain and recruit people.
Right. Well, hopefully we'll give you some help with that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. The chair would now recognize the gentlewoman, Representative McCollum, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you said it so well, and so did Ranking Member Obernolte. We can't thank you enough for your patience and hanging in with us as we went over to vote. All of us were looking at our watches saying we've got important work and important people to talk to about doing it together in partnership. So to the tribal leaders, thank you so very, very much. I would just make a quick comment. I'm glad we're finally starting to see some of these landed trusts, land settlements, and that happening. We need to figure out a way to expedite it so that as the tribal members are thinking into the future about what to do with the land, whether it's protecting the sacred site, doing economic development, school, more cultural activities on it, hunting, fishing, racing, whatever it may be, that land come back into their possession quicker so that they can move forward. The last comment I would make is on law enforcement, something that we've heard a lot of testimony and struggle with in the Interior Appropriations Committee. The law enforcement is in several different pots of money, but there's all kinds of things that intertwine with it. Broadband, good roads in the transportation account. But then it comes down to people, right? And the challenges that law enforcement has in a community if they return back home and there's just a few officers, you're dealing with, friends, relatives, people you went to high school with on a daily basis. And you're the one with the squad car when you're off duty. If something goes awry, whether it's a first aid emergency, you hear about a potential suicide, just domestic violence, anything. So a lot of these officers, just quite frankly, are never off duty. And municipalities such as the municipality I was in North St. Paul, we were looking to enrich our police departments by having more people with more diverse backgrounds. So that's another thing. These officers, not only, the respite that they don't get, the lack of funds and pension and health care that they're not receiving, that they could get. And then you add to that they are literally recruited because there are municipalities that are looking for diversity. So these are really important bills that we listened to and heard about today, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for holding the hearing. And with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you so much for your comments. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Representative Chuy Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to address my questions to Chairman Rupnik. I want to ask you the same question I asked Mr. Garriott earlier today. Can you describe the process that you envision to receive final compensation for the land matter of the Potawatomi that we discussed earlier and that you referenced in your testimony?
Yes, thank you for that question. The process that I would hope that we could come up with, and if Congress would agree to it today, is a fair and equitable dollar amount today. I think that we could go ahead on and move forward with that. I would hope that we wouldn't have to go through the department's process, which would take and extend this out multiple months. Instead, we could work closely with the department and the tribe to come up with a fair and equitable amount, agree on that, and then get that before Congress, is my hopes.
Yes, and I echo the remarks made by Representative McCollum that we should seek to accelerate and to expedite this process. These are issues that have been awaiting resolution for so long. So your point is well taken with me. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, over the last few years, especially since last year when the legislation was introduced in the Senate, are you aware of any other tribe coming forward to claim ownership of the Shibane Reservation?
I am not aware of any tribe that has come forward since the bill was introduced in the Senate.
And there's been ample time and plenty of public discussion for anyone who might have an interest or a claim to have come forth during that time. Would that be an accurate statement on my part?
Yes, sir, it would. We purchased 129 acres 2009. If somebody wanted to make a claim against that purchase, they've had plenty of opportunity to do that.
Okay. And could you just talk once again a little bit about, I think you stated earlier that you've spent around $10 million to repurchase that land?
That's typically the way things go, especially when tribes are trying to purchase land within a reservation. Folks that own the land know that there is some culturally significant reason why the tribe wants that, and generally tribes get extorted for those lands, and it's pretty sad that tribes have to go back and repurchase land that was given to them.
Yes. Thank you for emphasizing that. Those are all the questions I have. I want to associate myself with the remarks of other members for the vote series delay that all of you have experienced. We know you've traveled from afar. We appreciate your patience, and thank you for hanging with us. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes are there any members who have not had their 5 minutes in recognition? We don't have any on the Republican side. So, and I think we're done as well. Then I want to thank the witnesses once again. How many times can we say it? I don't think we can say it enough. Thank you for your patience, both today, and then thank you also for bringing these important pieces of legislation forward to us, for answering the questions that we have. As you know, the members may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to kindly respond to those in writing, so we'll have them for the congressional record. And under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be open for 10 business days for those responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.